It was January 15th, 2012, one of the coldest winters I had ever experienced. The kind where the snow piled up in the mountains and the wind cut through every layer of clothing you wore, biting at your skin. It was the kind of cold that made your bones ache as if the chill was coming from within you. That winter, I worked late nights in a small diner by the train station, serving coffee and hot meals to the few stranded travelers and locals who braved the cold. I was finishing up my shift one night just after midnight. The diner was empty, except for an old man sitting in the corner booth, nursing a cup of tea, and the radio quietly playing in the background. The world outside was a thick white sheet of snow, with only a faint light from the station's lampposts cutting through the darkness. I was about to lock up when I noticed something strange. There was a light in the distance, coming from the train tracks. The thing was, no trains were supposed to run that late, especially not in such frigid weather. The schedule had been canceled for the night due to the heavy snowstorm. Curious, I pulled on my coat and stepped outside to take a look. The wind bit at my face as I made my way toward the tracks. The light grew brighter, and as I got closer, I saw it. A train, slowly moving down the tracks. It wasn't like any train I had ever seen. The engine was dark, and the cars behind it appeared old, the kind you'd expect from a time long past. They were covered in snow, their surfaces battered and scarred by years of wear, and the train was moving without any sound, no rumble of wheels, no whistle, nothing, just the eerie glow from its lights cutting through the night. I stopped dead in my tracks, confusion washing over me. I had lived in Harpersville all my life, and I knew every inch of these tracks. This train wasn't supposed to be here. Without thinking, I started walking toward it, my curiosity overpowering the sense of unease creeping up my spine. As I neared the train, I noticed something even stranger. The windows were covered in frost, yet there was no condensation, no sign of warmth inside. And the train didn't stop, not even as I got close. It kept moving at a slow, deliberate pace, as if it were waiting for something. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and touched one of the train cars. It was cold, colder than the air around me, but it didn't feel like the snow or the night's chill. It was almost unnatural. I stepped back, suddenly feeling a heavy sense of dread settling in my chest. Before I could turn to leave, the door to one of the cars creaked open. I froze, staring at the silhouette in the doorway. A figure stepped out, tall, hunched over, its face hidden in shadow. For a moment, I thought I might be imagining it, but then the figure stepped closer, and I could hear the faint sound of breathing, raspy, like someone who hadn't taken a proper breath in years. "Do you need help?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond, but it took another step toward me, moving unnaturally slowly, like it was dragging its feet across the snow. The train was still moving, but its motion felt off, as if it were gliding, not running. My heart pounded in my chest as I instinctively took a step back. The figure reached into its coat, pulling something from its pocket, a ticket. But it wasn't any regular ticket. It looked old, yellowed with age, with markings I couldn't make out. It extended the ticket toward me, and for a moment, I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. "Get on," the figure rasped, its voice sounding like nails on a chalkboard. "The journey is ready." I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. What was this train? Who was this person? Where was it even headed? "Get on," the figure repeated, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark, a piercing, unnatural light that sent a chill through my body. It's time to board. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and leave, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. The air grew heavier, colder, and I could feel something closing in on me, something ancient, something from beyond the ordinary world. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But I was frozen, unable to tear my eyes away from the glowing figure and its outstretched hand. Finally, I broke free from the trance and stumbled backward, tripping over the snow as I scrambled to get away. I ran as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. When I looked back, the train was gone. There was no sign of it, no sign of the figure, nothing but empty, snow-covered tracks. The rest of the night passed in a blur, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. I locked up the diner, hurried home, and tried to forget what had happened, but I couldn't. The image of the figure, the glowing ticket, haunted me every time I closed my eyes. The next morning, the news came in. A train had been reported missing for over 50 years. A train that was rumored to have disappeared in a snowstorm, with no trace of its passengers ever being found. And the strangest part? The train was reported to have last been seen in Harpersville, passing through the very same tracks I had walked on just hours earlier. I never spoke about what happened that night. No one would believe me. But every winter, when the fog rolls in and the snow falls thick, I still hear the sound of a train that no one can see but me, moving silently through the night. And every time, I wonder if the journey is truly over or if it's just waiting for me to board again. If you're a fan of spine-chilling true stories, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Hauntify, so you won't miss our next terrifying tale. It was December 19th, 2024, in a quiet, remote area of Vermont. The snow was falling heavily, and the roads were icy and dangerous. The wind howled as my car headlights barely cut through the thick storm. I had driven for hours, and I was tired. All I could think about was getting to a warm place to rest and drink something hot. I was driving through an area I hadn't been to in a while. The last time I was here, during summer, it had felt like a peaceful and lively place, but tonight, everything felt different, darker, quieter, and strange. The trees on both sides of the road looked like they were hiding something, and the snow kept falling in thick layers. It felt as though the world around me was frozen in time. My dog, Max, was sitting next to me, normally calm and relaxed. Tonight, he was acting strange. He was stiff, his ears flat against his head, and he kept glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. Every now and then, he would whine softly. Something was bothering him. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. Almost midnight. The storm was getting worse. The snow was falling faster, and the wind was getting stronger. I was starting to get nervous, but I thought to myself, just a little longer, and I'll be out of this storm. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the woods to my right. Max started barking loudly, his eyes wide with fear. I froze. The sound didn't feel normal, like a tree falling. It sounded wrong. I glanced toward the woods, but all I saw was darkness. I couldn't tell if it was an animal or something else. Max was still barking, and I could feel my heart pounding. I wasn't sure what to do. Maybe it was just the storm making me paranoid. I tried to calm Max down, but before I could, I saw something strange in the distance. There were figures standing in the middle of the road. At first, I thought they were just trees, but as I looked closer, I realized they were moving. 3 tall, shadowy figures barely visible through the snowstorm. They were standing still, but I could feel them watching me. I felt my stomach drop. Something wasn't right. Max was now growling deeply in the seat beside me, his body tense. I quickly hit the brakes and started to reverse, trying to back away from the figures. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer. I wasn't sure how, but I could tell they were moving toward my car. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a loud knock on the window. I froze. No one should be out here in the storm, and there was no way they could have reached me so fast. But there, on the glass of the passenger window, was a hand. It was pale and long, with fingers that seemed to stretch too far. Max barked like crazy, and I quickly looked away, my heart racing. I wasn't sure if what I had seen was real, but when I looked back at the window, the hand was still there. I was terrified. What was happening? Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and drove off, not looking back. I didn't care about the road conditions anymore. I just needed to get away from whatever was out there. But even though I sped up, the storm seemed to pull me back, as if the road was never ending. It felt like I was trapped in some sort of nightmare. The snow made it impossible to see anything ahead of me. I kept driving, hoping I was going in the right direction, but I didn't know anymore. The trees on both sides looked the same, and I was sure I had passed this spot before. That's when I saw it again. A shadow moving quickly across the snow just out of reach of my headlights. It was tall and unnatural. It moved with a weird speed and grace that made my heart race even faster. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was drive faster. I glanced at Max. He was still barking wildly, his fur standing on end. Whatever it was, he knew it was dangerous. I drove on for what felt like hours, but it seemed like I was getting nowhere. No matter how fast I went, the shadow kept appearing, disappearing, then reappearing. Every time, it felt closer. I finally reached a small town, and the storm seemed to let up a little. I parked at a gas station, not sure whether to stay in the car or go inside. My hands were still shaking as I stepped out. Inside, the gas station attendant looked at me strangely when I walked up to the counter. I tried to calm myself down, but the fear still gripped me. I told him about the figures in the woods and the strange hand at my window. He didn't seem shocked. Instead, he gave me a cold smile. "You're not the first person to see them," he said. "It's been happening for years. Some people say the storm brings them out. Some say they're just myths. But others, well, they say the figures are real, and once you see them, they follow you." I felt a chill run down my spine. So it wasn't just me? Other people had experienced this too? The attendant didn't offer any more details, but I understood enough. Whatever it was that I had seen out there in the woods, it wasn't something I could explain. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't something I should ever try to explain. I never went back to those woods after that night, but every winter since, I still get the feeling that something is following me, just out of sight, waiting for the next storm to come. And every time it snows, I remember the figures in the woods and the cold, pale hand that knocked on my window. It was the night of January 8th, 2025, in a small secluded town in the mountains of Wyoming. The kind of place where the streets are always quiet, and the only sound you can hear at night is the howl of the wind against the trees. I had recently moved to this town to escape the noise of the city, but little did I know the peace would come at a terrifying price. That night, a fierce snowstorm had hit, and the roads were covered with several inches of snow. I had been out all day running errands and was eager to get back home to my cozy cabin by the lake. It was already past 11 p.m., and I could feel my eyelids growing heavy as I drove down the long, winding road. The snow was falling thick, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I turned on the headlights, hoping they would cut through the storm, but it was like driving through a wall of white. The only company I had in the car was my dog Rex, a large, shaggy shepherd mix who was sitting quietly in the passenger seat. He was normally an energetic dog, but tonight he seemed off. His fur was bristling, and his eyes were darting nervously from side to side. I chalked it up to the storm, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As I drove on, I passed through a dense stretch of trees where the road curved sharply to the left. The eerie silence of the night was broken only by the sound of the snow crunching under my tires. That's when I saw it. A figure standing by the side of the road. It was a woman, dressed in a long, old-fashioned coat, her face hidden under the shadow of a large, wide-brimmed hat. She was standing still, not moving, as if she had been waiting there for someone to pass by. I slowed down, my instincts telling me to stop and help her. The storm was relentless, and it was clear she must be freezing. I rolled down the window, the cold air biting my skin. "Are you okay?" I called out, but she didn't answer. I thought I saw her move slightly, but it was hard to be sure in the dim light. I could feel Rex growling low in his throat beside me, his body stiff with tension. Something in the way he reacted sent a shiver down my spine. But I couldn't just leave her there, so I pulled over to the side of the road and opened the door. The wind whipped around me, the snow swirling in the air, and I called out again, "Hey, do you need help?" The woman didn't respond, but I could see her now more clearly. Her clothes were old-fashioned, like something from a different era. Long skirts, a coat with fur trim, and those strange wide-brimmed hats that I had only seen in old photographs. She was standing perfectly still, not moving an inch, her back to me. My heart started racing. Something felt off. I took a step toward her, calling out one more time, "Are you lost?" Finally, she turned around. I froze. Her face was pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight through me. Her skin was almost transparent, and her lips were blue, as if she had been out in the cold for far too long. She didn't speak a word, just stared at me with those empty eyes. Without thinking, I jumped back into my car, slamming the door behind me. Rex was now barking furiously, and I could feel my own pulse pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking as I put the car in reverse, quickly backing away from her. But before I could speed off, the woman raised one hand, her fingers thin and long, pointing directly at me. I could feel a chill run down my spine, the temperature in the car dropping even further, as if she was reaching into my very soul. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickly put the car in drive and sped away, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my cabin, where I quickly locked the door behind me. Rex was still on edge, pacing around the living room, growling softly as if he could sense something was wrong. I tried to shake off the fear, but the image of the woman's face haunted me. What was that? Was it a trick of the storm or something more sinister. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing strange sounds outside, rustling, tapping, as if someone or something was trying to get in. I checked the locks on every window and door, but it didn't help. It felt as if the very house was alive with an eerie energy. In the morning, I woke up exhausted and decided to go out and clear the driveway. The snowstorm had finally stopped, and the world outside was blanketed in white, the trees bending under the weight of the snow. But as I stepped outside, something caught my eye. By the side of the road, in the exact spot where I had seen the woman the night before, there was a trail of footprints in the snow. The prints were strange, shallow, uneven, and as if they were made by someone walking in slow, hesitant steps. But what was most unsettling was that they led right up to the middle of the road, then stopped. There were no other footprints, no signs of her leaving. It was as if she had simply disappeared. I went back inside, my hands trembling, and tried to convince myself that it had just been my imagination. But Rex wouldn't stop staring out the window, growling under his breath. Every now and then, he'd raise his head and sniff the air, as if he could smell something I couldn't. Days passed, and I tried to forget about the strange encounter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I went out, it felt as though eyes were following me from the shadows of the trees. Sometimes I'd hear soft footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. The cold, pale face of the woman lingered in my mind, and I couldn't escape it. One night, nearly a week after the incident, I was sitting by the fire when I heard a knock on the door. I froze. No one lived near me. It was late, and the snowstorm was still raging outside. Hesitantly, I went to the door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. Confused and slightly panicked, I opened the door, and there, lying in the snow on my doorstep, was a single, wide-brimmed hat. I didn't go outside again that night, and I don't think I'll ever feel safe here again. Something dark, something ancient, follows me now. Something that no longer walks the earth, but haunts the land in the form of a ghostly woman in a snowstorm, her cold fingers waiting to point at anyone who dares to stop. To this day, I've never seen her again, but sometimes, on the coldest nights, I feel her presence watching me, waiting for the right moment to make herself known once more. It was January 15th, 2021. The winter storm had hit like a freight train, sweeping through the small town of Evergreen Ridge, nestled deep in the heart of the Adirondack Mountains. The air was thick with snow, and the world outside my window looked like a scene from a ghost story, silent, cold, and haunting. I had just moved into a small cabin on the outskirts of town, hoping to escape the chaos of the city for some peace and solitude. But that night, peace was the last thing I would find. I had spent the day unpacking, cleaning, and settling into the cabin. By nightfall, the storm had grown so fierce that even the strongest trees outside my cabin bent under the weight of the snow. The wind howled against the windows, creating an eerie wailing sound, and the world outside was obscured by the thick white blanket of snow. I had just finished my dinner when I heard something unusual, a low thudding sound, as if something or someone was moving outside. At first, I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on me or the trees shifting in the wind. But as the sound grew louder, I felt a creeping unease coil in my stomach. It wasn't the wind, it was something else. Rex My dog, who had been lying peacefully by the fire, suddenly sprang up, his fur standing on end. His ears were perked, and his eyes were fixed on the door. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Something was out there. I could feel it too. I slowly stood up, my heart pounding. I had to check. Maybe it was an animal, or worse, someone who had gotten lost in the storm. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way to the door, Rex at my heels, his growls now louder. I opened the door cautiously, stepping into the night. The snow was falling in thick, heavy flakes, and the air was bitterly cold. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead, the storm blurring the landscape into an endless sea of white. But there was something there, a shadow moving in the distance, just outside the reach of my flashlight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling in the cold. The shadow didn't answer. It just moved slowly, deliberately across the snowy expanse. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel Rex's body shaking beside me, his growls now turning into sharp barks. I stepped forward, my heart racing. The shadow didn't seem to notice me. It just kept moving, its form growing clearer as I approached. It was tall, far taller than any person, and its movements were unnatural, too smooth, too fluid, like a figure that didn't belong to the real world. It was dark, almost like a silhouette, but with jagged edges as if it was made of smoke and shadows. "Who's there?" I called out again, my voice shaky but louder this time. The figure stopped. Then, to my horror, it slowly turned to face me. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless, just a dark, empty void where eyes should have been. The darkness seemed to suck in all the light around it, like it was a living black hole. Its body was tall and thin, too thin to be human, with limbs that stretched unnaturally long. Rex barked furiously, but the shadow didn't flinch. It just stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for something. My body was frozen in place, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. I could hear nothing but the sound of the wind and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Suddenly, the shadow began to move again, but this time it was coming toward me. I turned to run, panic flooding my veins. But as I moved, I felt something cold and heavy brush against the back of my neck. A whisper, barely audible, drifted through the air, chilling me to the core. "Leave, now." The words were not spoken in a human voice. They sounded more like a hiss, like something ancient and malevolent was speaking directly into my mind. I didn't stop to think. I ran as fast as I could, my legs burning with the effort. Rex was right behind me, barking madly, his nails clicking against the wooden floor of the cabin. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, my hands trembling. The sound of my breathing was loud in the silence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The shadow, it was still out there, waiting. I stood in the dark cabin, my eyes darting around, looking for anything that would explain what had just happened. But there was nothing. The house was still, and Rex had settled down, though he was still eyeing the door nervously. I tried to convince myself that it had been a hallucination, that the storm and isolation had gotten to me. But the look in Rex's eyes, the way he kept staring at the door, told me otherwise. Something was out there. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made my heart race. I kept imagining that shadow lurking just beyond the walls, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. Around 3 a.m., I heard the knock. Soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second. Knock, knock, knock. I stood frozen in my bed, my breath caught in my throat. It was coming from the door, the same door I had locked just hours ago. The knocking continued, slow and methodical, like it was testing me, trying to see if I would open it. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe that the world outside was still normal, or that I could call someone for help. But when I checked my phone, I found that there was no signal, no bars, nothing. The knocking grew louder, now accompanied by a scratching sound, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed Rex, holding him close as I waited for the inevitable. The shadow was out there. I could feel it, its presence pressing against the walls of the cabin, seeping into the very air I breathed. Then, in an instant, it stopped. The knocking, the scratching, the feeling of dread, it all went silent. For a moment, I thought it was over. But as I looked around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The window, my only source of light, was now completely covered in frost. There was no snow on the outside of the window, just thick layers of ice. But the frost wasn't just on the glass. It had formed patterns, intricate and unnatural, covering the entire pane. And in the center of it was something that made my heart stop. A handprint. A dark, frozen handprint with fingers splayed wide, as if someone had pressed their hand against the glass from the outside, leaving their mark. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed my keys, shoved Rex into the back seat of the car, and sped off into the storm. The roads were treacherous, but I didn't care. I had to get away from that cabin, away from the shadow. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, where I found a small motel and checked in. The manager looked at me with concern, but I didn't care. I was safe, at least for now. But as I lay in the motel bed, trying to block out the sound of the storm outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow's empty face waiting for me to return. It's been days since I left the cabin, but the haunting presence has never left me. I don't know if I'll ever go back to that place. And to this day, I can't help but wonder, was the shadow just a figment of my imagination? Or was it something far darker, something that still lurks in the forests, waiting for its next victim? Whatever it was, it's still out there, watching, waiting.